Okay, so I think we should probably have everyone back here so we can get ready to start again. So anonymous attendee. So it's pretty cool that we've got people from anonymous attending this boot camp. So I hope someone that's from anonymous that you're getting good value out of this. So how do you think the COVID pandemic's forcing many to work from home has influenced business decision to change gear from how they handle cloud security, et cetera, and all? I think some companies are taking it more serious now because of working from home, and then some companies I think they shifted to cloud and maybe they overlooked some things because some companies are really diligent about their security, and then some companies it's like things are just running, and a lot of times business and management wants things implemented really quickly, and they miss things, and that's how us pen testers go in and we find vulnerabilities, how we exploit stuff, and how the bad guys do because it gets overlooked, it gets put in place. So I think it's kind of some people have focused on it more and realized that if they're doing more of their business in the cloud, then they're having to make sure it's more secure. But then there's that misconception that people just think cloud is more secure. So a lot of people just think and just like anything, if it's configured correctly and secure, it's going to be more secure. But if it's not, then you're not really gaining any security there. But so yeah, I think some companies are the companies that really take security seriously. I think they're doing more to be more secure, and the whole thing. People working from home, that adds in a whole new layer. So you got to have your VPN set up, and then you have to worry about also like some of the phishing and social engineering going to people's home. People now are trying to access from you know exploit people in their homes, and sometimes that may be easier to exploit than trying to exploit enterprise. So that's one of the ways it also affects things. So this section here, we're going to cover password spraying and password reuse. So a constant theme here, you look at pen testing. So using things like password spraying is very popular with like Office 365 and Azure, but these are concepts that can be used in different areas. Password reuse, that's one of the big ones that you find in an organization. If you're doing a network pen test, you manage to get credentials somehow or another. Either you got a password hash, use something like Mimikatz to get the clear text version of that password. A lot of times, these are used throughout the organization multiple times. So the admin password may be the same thing across the organization. So, these are things that are being used even outside of the Azure world and outside of the cloud in general too. Passwords in GitHub. So these are other places for people to find information. Some people's code on GitHub could have encoded credentials or information that could be valuable on a pen test. So some of these concepts, just like I mentioned earlier, when you learn these concepts, you can transfer them across different areas. So, I mean, if you were familiar with password spraying, password reuse before this comes along, which probably a lot of you are, then adapting to this to the cloud areas is you're just going to have the way it's conducted may be a little bit different, but the idea is the same. So we got this, let's see, password spraying. So enumerating Azure, spraying legacy, spraying passwords and using legacy protocols, because legacy protocols are usually more vulnerable. And so I've got this link here that we got in a slide, and I will share it with you so you can see it better. And keep that in your notes, because it's always difficult to be following along on videos or some virtual event and trying to copy and trying to figure out and type in these links, because they get pretty long. Something like this is pretty easy plain text to figure out, but at least at any rate. So this article here is on protecting your organization against password spraying. So it kind of tells you a little bit about it. When hackers plan an attack, they often engage in a number of games. They can invest significant time pursuing a single high value target. Someone in the C-level, C-suite, for example, to do spear phishing. Also, you when you're going after the people, the higher up, sometimes it's also referred to as whaling because they're the big fish. So that's sometimes they're referred to as that. So a lot of times you can use these password spraying attacks. And so basically what you need a list of usernames. Once you acquire your list of new usernames, then you'll take like some common passwords. If you're able to, collect credentials for someone, then you could take that password. You can figure out possibly password complexity from the information you get from the passwords. So you create these lists and you'll have like certain passwords and you'll go through attacking different accounts, and you want to be careful not to lock out. So you want like so many attempts. If you can find out what the password lockout value is, then you want to set your threshold like one below that so you don't lock out. And so as Michael explained here, summer 2020, those are good types of passwords to use. And usually what it's going to be when someone starts new with the company, they give out like a default set of credentials. And if they don't change it, and then some people, that's the way they set their usernames and passwords. And it's kind of funny because I've had people in my college class and I would give them credentials to log into the lab. And the person that set up the lab, although they were forced to change their password upon login, they've already been through a few lectures before they got access to labs. And so when they got their password that's like summer 2020 or fall, 2020, they kind of laugh when they see the password, although it forces them to change their password upon login. But if the password got in the wrong hands, then good opportunity because the attacker could change the password to where they want to. So taking common passwords like that and then go through that environment and seeing if you can actually use that to compromise an account. Once you have that, then you're able to log into Azure or Office 365 with those credentials, providing there's not multi-factor, some other things in place preventing you from that. So kind of the steps here to do a password spray, they're kind of mentioning you need to acquire a list of users. So sometimes this is kind of easy. The way the passwords, like for something like Azure, a lot of companies will use first name, last name, or first initial, last name. Once you figure out the email naming convention, then you can enumerate users, and you create this list of users and you go through. And so here is the step 3, spray passwords. Finding a list of common passwords is even easier. You can do a Bing search. So there's a lot of good passwords out there. I mean, rocku.txt is still a very popular password list. And so you can take these and you use that as your password list. And so passwords spray using one password across multiple accounts. So this is going to cut down on your likelihood of getting locked out because you're using the single password. And so they say here, if the attack is not successful, they wait 30 minutes to avoid triggering a timeout. So you want to be really careful in this. And if you're doing kind of more of a red team or adversarial emulation, you're not wanting to get caught. So you want to be very careful. And to get this to pull this off, because you're doing this and someone in an organization sees these activities, they're going to send an email out to people, and they may say, instruct people to possibly change their passwords or something, and or be on the watch out for any kind of suspicious activity with their account if they're logged in from locations that they shouldn't be logging in. So once you try that, you use the password across that. And so getting access is the third step. Eventually, one of the passwords works against the accounts. And so once you have that account, now you're able to log into someone's Office 365 account. And once you have access to an actual user account internally, then you can turn that to further your attacks further. So now, if I get access to an office administrator's account, then that office administrator can then, email other office administrators or management. And so it's going to seem more realistic coming from an internal account. So that's where that can be dangerous. And so they're saying here to configure Azure Active Directory password protection. So Azure AD password protection allows you to eliminate easily guessed passwords and customize lockout settings for your environment. And that sometimes, making sure that you're using complex passwords help, but there's, if sometimes people can go out to these breached websites like have I been pwned and look up, there's different repositories and passwords lists of breached passwords out there that people will use sometimes. And so you want to make sure you're using, strong passwords, and you're making sure you're resetting them periodically. And you want to really be careful with internally. So the credentials that you set up a new user with, you don't want to use the same thing all the time. And it's best to use like a random password generator. That way someone is less likely to guess what the passwords are. And so here, let's see, simulate attacks from Office 365 advanced protection. So here's this attack simulator in Office 365, lets you run realistic but simulated phishing password attack campaign against your organization. So you pick a password, then run a campaign against many of the users you can. So that kind of covers the password spraying. And so password reuse. This is a dangerous one that a lot of people are guilty of sometimes, is the password reuse. And this is where, people get these password dumps, and attackers will use that as well as professionals to do their pen tests. And, if you breach someone's account, then that may be something they're using for banking. If you were able to get password dumps from like LinkedIn breaches and stuff, then sometimes people use that same password across different accounts. So those are some attack vectors that are used, and especially internally to a company or inside like an IT environment. A lot of times they use the same admin password across all the systems. A better solution would be use like a password vaulting system. So that way, when you need to use admin password, you're able to check it out and it's automatically updated on check-in. So, and you're not reusing those passwords. So those are more good ways to use that. And so Lily says, I use 1Password. So that's good. So does Mike Dunn. That's the best way to do that, because you only need to know that memorize 1Password to use that tool, and then you let it manage your passwords for you. And that's one of the interesting things with some of the Microsoft tools too that I recently noticed, because the college where I teach, we use Microsoft 365 for our email. And one of the cool thing about the Microsoft Authenticator tool, it also manages your passwords too. So that's kind of nice that they're building that in, because a lot of cases, companies have traditionally, you can use free tools, or you have to buy tools for the whole company to use a password manager. And so it's nice that like Microsoft is starting to include some of that with their Authenticator. So that one is something I just recently learned about. So we did have Anonymous did have a comment. So what's the best way to educate your employees on password attacks and phishing? Signed, Guy Fox. Well, one of the best way is educate them. One of the things I like is I think it's Know Before, the company Kevin Mitnick works for. I've had to take security awareness training, and it is probably some of the best, because they kind of show you some more detailed scenarios on why you don't reuse passwords. What is a risk of phishing attacks, and how to identify those. So those I like pretty well. And I think as far as like educating and trying to get people aware of these security risks, I think it's a good way to get them to buy in is through rewarding your employees. Give them points. And if someone gets so many points after so long, put them in a drawing for some sort of prize or some Amazon gift cards. Reward instead of punish. If you punish people, that kind of method doesn't work. People are going to care less. I've been in environments where people didn't care because, I guess the biggest thing was fear of losing their job. But I really think a good way of doing that is rewarding people. So if you're doing well in the security awareness training, if you're catching these phishing emails during the campaigns, reporting stuff, reward people. Maybe even have a list of people that have done good and share the email. These people are the winners this month or whatever, and And, someone finds legitimate phishing emails, celebrate and reward them for that. I think if you reward, that's a lot easier. I mean, it's like teaching a dog. If you go through like training your dog to do like obedience training, treats and stuff are a better way than punishment. Yeah, thanks, Michael. He shared the link to Know Before, but that's really some good training. I've taken several different courses, and sometimes companies create their own or they get some other pre-recorded thing, but the Know Before is pretty good. And they have some good real world examples. They go through there and they have you to identify these emails. So they'll go through and they'll have you actually looking through the different emails and selecting which is more likely a phishing email and identifying the different suspicious things, characteristics in that email. So that's a really good one for that. So the password reuse. So you're reusing old passwords. That's something that's pretty common. Most of us, if not currently guilty of it, may have been guilty in the past. I've done this before in the past where I've used, you got to change your password every 90 days or something. So you don't want to have to, you have to create a new password. So you use the same password again, but this is where, some people mentioned earlier, Lily and some others mentioned using password managers. Those are really great alternatives to trying to remember complex passwords. And you can make it more difficult because a random type password is going to be a lot harder for an attacker to guess than, because a lot of times people use, like we mentioned, Mike mentioned, like summer 2020, people use their different sports teams, their favorite bands. So if you're within an organization and you see someone's a Marvel Comics fan, then you're going to know that there's a good highly likelihood that some Marvel character is going to be in their passwords, or if they're like their favorite sports team. So they'll use the name of their favorite sports team, favorite entertainers, family members' names, pets' names. So they can use those. And so just by doing some good reconnaissance, an attacker, even externally, you're within a company, it's easier to see, but externally, if you can check out someone's social media, their Facebook, their LinkedIn, their Instagram, you get an idea for what they like. And so you get an idea of what you can, some of those passwords, guessing those. So password reuse, that's definitely one that you want to avoid. And it is something that's really good for us as attackers. And so passwords on GitHub. So this is a good place to find that. People will have their code, and you can even go back and look at older code. Maybe they updated it not to have hard-coded passwords, but maybe the older code still has the password. Maybe they haven't updated the password. So that's a good one there. Here's a link to the resource link in the slide. So here we can see, if you look through, they've got the passwords redacted out there. So we can see this is someone's Gmail account, and then the password is in there. And so we see this other server here, and it's got the Redis password and the port. So there's some information there that an attacker could use. So here is the article that's referenced in that slide. So this is a good article on how to scan GitHub repositories for secrets and credentials with open source. So here they kind of mentioned that, contains passwords, API tokens, and other credentials. And so as they mentioned here, you can search it from public, you can do searches on this. So some of the credentials found: SSH keys, API keys. People have some of their APIs to their cloud stuff out there, maybe their S3 buckets and so forth. User credentials and email password pair. So how do hackers access? So here it says, let's use a search to look for files called env. So we did the search and we see the results there. let's click on a random file. So they clicked on one of these files. And so this is one of these files that contains the credentials in there. So this is base 64, but you can base 64 decode this. And so you even get like database information here. So this is one of the things too that is kind of a good point, not really necessarily strictly to cloud, but as a pen tester, learning how to reverse engineer binaries and like Java jar files, APK files, sometimes you can find some hard-coded credentials in there as well as database information. Because if you find a target to the database, and if you have the credentials, if you know like the domain name or the host name or URL to that, then that's going to make your attacking even more successful. So they did redact a lot of the information exposed there. Surprising, this was the first search that they clicked on. So another search file is on env mailhost equals smtp gmail.com. So you're finding a list of email addresses and their passwords. So you'd be amazed at what people share out there. And you hear a lot of breaches where people are getting stuff from GitHub. And so here's like an example of a Google Dork for GitHub Google Dorks. So this is a good one there, which you can actually find from there, but I'll go ahead and share that up as well. So here's some different Google Dorks that you can run against to find stuff on GitHub. So we can see that information there. Yeah, thanks for sharing the resource there. So like I said, there's a lot of breaches you hear of that are using GitHub to gain credentials. And like I said, like they mentioned, it's also SSH keys, API keys, and all that sort of thing. So, a lot of developers use this. So a lot of times they just put this stuff there, and you can publicly search it and use that in your attack. So has anyone had much success or have done any much with trying to look for credentials or information on GitHub? Yeah, even using like Shodan's a good tool to look up information. But yeah, Google Dorks, I mean, that's really helpful when you're doing searches, a lot of times, and just practical use. If you're looking for information on a website, sometimes websites search functions really don't work that well. And so sometimes you can use Google Dorks to do searches on a website to find information easier because it was a poorly built website, but it could also be used for pen testing as well. Okay, so we're making pretty good progress through the content today. Like, as I mentioned, we'll go through probably more like the last day will be more live demos. So just GitHub is neat. Yeah, pretty interesting what people share out there. It just kind of makes you wonder with that how and if the security will get more tight over the years, that they'll improve that, since I know some exploit code and stuff has been taken off of GitHub, which is for a pen tester, that's kind of a bad thing. But yeah, and even if you go out to offensive security, it's got like a good list of Google Dorks just for general searches on exploit DB. Yeah, so if you go here to exploit DB, you can look up, they got some good information on Google Dorks. So this is very helpful. So I mean, this is probably one of, this is just know how to use Google Dorks is good on just research in general, outside of even doing reconnaissance or anything for pen test. It's a really good tool for that. So all the different things that you can search on using Google Dorks. You can do some of these things with other search engines, but you just don't see as much with, there are some things you can do with Bing, but it's just not as common think because Google Dorks was kind of the beginning of a lot of that. So that's where it kind of came from. So a lot of people use Google, plus all the information Google collects anyway. It makes it easier to find stuff.